Hi, friends. My name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People and a professional typologist and an expert on typology. One question that people often have when they first are introduced to cognitive functions or typology in general is a natural one. What is a cognitive function exactly? And there's a couple of different answers that people typically give. The answer I usually give is it's an attentional manner, a way of paying attention. And I define that as saying if I'm deliberating about something, for example, thinking hard about what to choose about in some fashion, then I'm not at that same time paying attention to how best to enjoy the thing I've chosen, obviously, right? So that there are some styles of paying attention that are exclusive of each other or have that kind of relationship. Well, another way, just definition of a cognitive function is that it's a perspective, and that's the definition I've heard in socionics. So I think that this video about how TI is the shit talker of cognitive functions will help reveal the nature of the perspective aspect of cognitive functions. Note that perspectives, to the extent that they're communicable, need to express something that has concrete meaning to it, or determined meaning to it linguistically, in some sort of symbolic language. Perspectives that aren't conveyed in language may still exist and be perspectives, but they're not perspectives that we can meaningfully talk about, so they don't help us understand perspectives very well. So let's take a look at a couple of slides. Both TI and FI decide status, which is that they are deliberation functions. They determine whether something has a status of thumbs up or thumbs down. They don't determine statuses that are more complicated than that. So if we look here, see it's just a check or an X. However, it may take some time before you determine whether it's a check or an X, and whether you're using TI or FI is going to tell us whether you are going to something about how quick that process is going to be, because TI decision making requires one to look at a lot less high resolution data, so to speak, whereas FI decision making is a lot more subtle and sophisticated in its relationship with a variety of data points, some of which are objective, some of which are subjective. So it can't parse things in a binary fashion like this. So one of the things that distinguishes FI and TI from the other functions, but not from each other, is that they are a way of paying attention that deliberates or decides whether it gets a green check mark or an X check mark, that this attentional process takes an indeterminate amount of time. It's going to vary depending on the complexity of the problem being deliberated about, right? Okay, so let's get rid of that, this one. And let's go now to this. So one of the ways in which psychology has the wrong perspective on emotions and thoughts is typically, I would say, the most default standard psychology narrative about emotions and thinking is it's good for people to balance them. Everybody has both and needs to have them in balance in some regard. So this is a picture of a healthy person who's got his heart raised up to his shoulders and his mind, because he's using them both equally, ignoring the fact, of course, that they are deliberation functions. They're styles of deliberation. No matter what you think about cognitive function or anything, thinking and feeling are different ways to deliberate about a problem. Forget anything about Jung, cognitive functions, personality type, or whatever. That is unavoidably so. Somebody might say, well, everybody always uses both to make deliberations. Well, the thing is, it may be true that each of those elements of the self has a voice in deliberating out a decision. One of those voices is weighted more heavily than the other. One of those voices is going to be instrumental, and one of those voices is going to be absolute. And they're never both going to be the same because of the way that the cognitive functions stack works. So this is a very misleading picture. It's encouraging people to try to find a balance between their thoughts and their feelings. Instead, they should understand the limitations of their own deliberation style, and that they don't get to be both. They don't get to have both, It doesn't work like that. Here's one way in which it kind of does work, though. You can have both, but you'll see here there are two different people involved in a partnership or a relationship. I generally believe it very much to be the case that it's best for a thinker and a feeler to be together rather than two thinkers or two feelers. And because they're two different people, you can actually have a meaningful value of balancing those two elements without being unrealistic and dishonest about the self. I use an disinterested calculus when I'm determining the status of something almost 100% of the time. Even though I have feelings when I'm watching TV and things make me cry or whatever, the point is I never justify my decisions with those kind of subjective justifications. And that's a habit of being that we call a perspective. So let's go on to the next slide here. The reality is like this instead. If you are habituated to making decisions with your heart, then you will not be making them with your mind and vice versa. That doesn't mean that the letter dichotomies should be embraced in full or something like, well, cognitive functions are because of the letter dichotomies that somebody's either a thinker or a feeler. So I've heard some people say, don't try to use the letter dichotomies, but the letter dichotomy is an accurate description of the truth, that in fact people are either a thinker or a feeler, that it's binary, that it's a deliberated out status. It's not instead a skill set that you're working out, as in that previous picture where you've got somebody who's developed the skill of balancing these two things. Well, all that would be is develop the skill of not being reflexively the self, fighting against the self continually, because you can't have both. There's an exclusivity quality to it. This is another way of interpreting it metaphorically as a picture. You see one person being torn in half, one half his brain saying one thing, his heart saying the other. This is less unrealistic than the idea of balancing them, but still not getting it, missing the point, right? This presumes that if somebody has, in fact, a fairly balanced relationship with the two deliberation functions, that's typically going to be 1-8 is probably about as balanced as it's going to get because they're the same kind of function, so they're inherently some distance apart from each other. But that person, a 1-8, that's the FI and TI DOMs, might feel somewhat torn sometimes. But by and large, that you're missing the point of TI and FI entirely if you view the world in this fashion. It's them tearing you in one direction or the other. That's a totally FI frame of reference. Because, in fact, it's not the case that it's tearing you apart. Instead, your heart and your mind are trying to defend you. They're your sword and your shield. Somebody's going to come with wrongness. It's wrong for one of two reasons. It's wrong because it crosses your boundaries, or it's wrong because it doesn't justify itself in any way that makes sense adequately for external parties. In other words, it's only right subjectively for the person who's claiming the right to declare it right for themselves. But nobody else should agree with them in their status determination, because until and unless they've also justified it with their mind and their sword. So if you've got an INTP or an INFP, they can probably do both. ISFP maybe, or ISTP. You probably do both. But the point is that they can't be a single person without ultimately affording one of those perspectives more priority when they conflict. To the extent that they're able to avoid making that decision, then it's not a very important part of their identity, which means they probably are 4 and 5 instead of, say, 1 and 8, right? Okay, so to further clarify what a perspective is, let me just say that TI is, of all the functions, the one that the one that is going to have perspectives that are voiced. In other words, it's the shit talker of the functions. It will explain what's wrong with the other functions and how they are too limited as a perspective, or they are not adequate as a perspective. That's the perspective that TI is. It is this perspective that says, here's why this is adequate, but mostly it says, here's how and why this is not adequate. If you're a deliberator, by nature you're deliberative, which means you don't want to rush to judgment or rush into action too soon. So it's better to err on the side of negating. Now, TI is additionally much better at negating than FI, because TI is a habit of attention that rejects one's own personal interest in the status determination. Assuming I had no interest in the matter, what is the true determination of the status of this? Meaning, what is that which validates externally and objectively? So, since it is that, and understands itself to be such, naturally it's going to be very good at pointing out where the deficiencies of all the other perspectives are in validating things. TI is one of two possible validating functions, and it's the one that validates externally and objectively for everyone. So, of course, TI people are always going to be telling others how their shit doesn't validate. It's a perfect description, a perfect example from which to glean perspective examples. So, if I were to say, well, here's what FI thinks of these other things, that would be almost purely metaphor and silly. Although you could do some of it, right? But it doesn't necessarily have an opinion about those things, except for in the particular instance of it and the individual's response to that instance. There's no general rules or universality that is implicit to the function as there is in TI. So now the one that I pushed several times and I'm not meant to yet, the shit talk function and what they regard, how TI regards the other functions. Any is inadequate as an intentional manner because, according to TI's perspective, it fails to be TI by means of being too speculative. FE, it fails to be TI by being unaccountable, encouraging a lack of accountability for individuals, schmoozing and stuff, you know. TE, it considers incorrect or controlling. Incorrect in being controlling. In other words, trying to seize what is not legitimate to some extent. SE, it sees it as hasty and ham-fisted, brutish. After all, the action function is the thing that ends the deliberative process, generally speaking. If you're trying to decide what to say, the action of saying it ends that deciding process. If you're trying to decide what to do, the action of taking action and doing it ends that deliberation process. So, deliberators tend to view actions with some skepticism because it seems like the thing that forces its way through and ruins everything all the time. NI, it sees as unjustified and possibly hooey, depending on the TI user. SI, it views as dumb and primitive. So you've probably seen those ads for investment portfolios that say past results are no guarantee of future outcomes. A TI user is the one who came up with that expression, and a TI user is the person who shakes his head and says, oh my God, these people who just assume it's going to happen the same way it happened before are not thinking well. You can't afford a status as legitimate just because you used to have a status as legitimate. You have to critique it on some merits. This, of course, FI finds it selfish and unfair. What the TI tool user like me tends to find himself yelling at FI people periodically is, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Which is to say, you can't have it both ways. Either it's meow, in which case you get meow, or it's meow, in which case you don't get meow. So in other words, I said to somebody who was trying to argue that Trump was intelligent earlier, I said, okay, look, because after I pointed out that there was all he needed to do to have me concede at least the formal debate on the matter, just for sport purposes or whatever, He's provided me one example of a quotation of Trump intelligently talking about something. Not being correct, but intelligently talking about something. And of course, he was not able to produce one, but he then proceeded to hypothesize that Trump really is intelligent, but he was acting dumb as a strategy or something. So what I would say if I said to him was, okay, well then he's either wicked because he's being deceptive and deceiving all the American people in order to gain power under false pretenses, or he's stupid because that's not why he's sounding so dumb. You can't have it both ways. If you want to win, if you want to retain I get to call Trump intelligent, and we should all think of him as intelligent point, then you've got to acknowledge that makes him wicked then, because he's been willfully deceiving everybody and attained power under false pretenses. Because he certainly didn't act smart before. So, you can't have your cake and eat it too. But the FI thing is, but I like Trump. I want him to be both smart and good. Sorry, he's neither probably, but it's like when you're dumb enough, you are sort of excused from a lot of moral critiques. He's not smart enough to know how wickedy he's being. It's hard to hold him morally accountable for it. And what I mean by wicked he's being, I mean his whole approach to all frame of reference does not validate with TI at all. Because TI, as my tool function, I go, as the president, you're a public official serving the public. Your number one job is to make sure you've explained all your justifications for everything. Because if you're not using the right language, we know we're going right off the edge of a cliff, because people who don't adequately deliberate out via the universal deliberation function TI before deciding what action to take basically shit on all the rest of our faces. So that's why TI uses language like I am right now in conjunction with my extroverted intuition to shit on FI back and say, no, you're the ones who shit on everybody else. Because you're so desperate to get what you want that you don't care whether it validates or not. And you made a deal with two devils, the TE and FE devil. The TE devil's right along with you. They don't care at all. They're just like, well, let me get it done. I gotta make sure FI gets her cake and eats it too, plus gets an extra serving, and that nobody else gets any. Because that's what it says on the work order, and I don't question anything. And then they made a deal with the devil FE too. Well, as long as we schmooze enough, we don't really have to be right. It's all about greasing the wheels and networking and stuff. And, so obviously, why do I have these attitudes and stuff? It's because TI is the shit talk function. It's the deliberation function for universal things. In other words, it's the thing that polices the police. TI is the asswipe of the cognitive function commune. All the other cognitive functions hate him. Why? Well, they hate both TE and TI, all the other cognitive functions. The F's and the N's and the S's are just like, TE and TI, go fuck yourself. Because TI is always telling everybody how they need to stop doing whatever it is they're doing and justify themselves first. And TE is always saying, you need to stop talking and justifying things and thinking what you're thinking and then analyzing things for yourself and just follow this set of instructions. And so everybody else is just like, That's it for this video. It went longer than I thought. It's almost 20 minutes. I expected it to be a 5-minute video, but I guess I got a little carried away. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. That didn't work. That's supposed to stop it.